Good evening and welcome. My name is Lynn Cook. I'm the organizer of this program, and I'd like to begin by thanking, as always, our steadfast patrons. We could not do this without them, and this Artist on Artist series has been now going for many years and has reverberations which I think have affected not only this community, but the discourse on contemporary art, and so I'm enormously grateful to them. I'd also like to thank Kristen Poor and Patrick Heilman, whose organizational skills and logistics make it happen. Without them, it certainly would not be what it is. It's a great pleasure to introduce Nancy Davenport. She's, I expect, well known, or her work is well known to many of you. She's shown in this city regularly, and most recently in 2008 at the Nicole Clagsburn Gallery. She was born in Vancouver in British Columbia. She gained her BFA from York University in Toronto and an MFA from the School of Visual Arts in New York. She lives and works here. She shows widely and has a show coming up next July in Belgium, and in a couple of days she will be part of a show with Haroon Faroki and Sharon Lockhart in Windsor, Canada, right near Detroit. That's right. Nancy tonight is going to talk about on Kawara, as you can see. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thanks for coming. Sorry. So I'm beginning this by showing not a painting, not a telegram or a postcard, not one of Kawara's more massive archival works, but a booklet. It's a booklet that documents his first installation of pure consciousness. He began this series in 1998. In Australia, might as well go ahead. And since then, it's been enacted in 8 other locations. So in each of the pure consciousness exhibitions, Kawara's installed 7 paintings from the Today series in kindergarten classrooms around the world. Apparently, no explanation is given to the kids about these works that are hung on the back wall of the class. In fact, Kawara insists that they not be used as teaching aids, even though I imagine it's tempting for the teachers because the kids are learning at this stage about how to write and read the figures and letters that are depicted in the paintings. When I first saw these things, when I first saw one of these photographs, I thought, that's sweet. But I felt some disappointment, as if somehow the gesture together with the title was a little too quaint, that it reduced or domesticated the morbidity of the Today paintings. But as I looked through each successive pure consciousness booklet, I'm not saying catalog because I think they've come to exceed the status of catalogs. After looking at the evolution of the series, I've come to think of it as far more unwieldy, really very weird, both funny and deadly serious, the kind of deadpan humor characteristic of all Kawara's work. But with these first manifestations of pure consciousness, for me they function like a further opening up of the Today series, raising new questions in relation to Kawara's other repeating works. Now, in more than one essay, they've been described, or the deployment of these paintings in in these pieces is described as redemptive, which is a term I find really provocative. But before discussing this, I want to consider the paintings that we're talking about. At this point, well, the repeating ritual of describing Kawara's ritual is something that I don't want to forego. At this point, Kawara's done over 2,000, I think, of these date paintings since he started the Today series in '66. At the center of each canvas is the date on which the painting is made, abbreviated in the language of the country in which it is made. They have to be started and finished on the same day. They're painted freehand with incredible precision and craftsmanship. And he uses successive layers of color, building up to mostly dark hues. Each work is stored in its own handmade box, which also contains newspaper clippings from the same day and place. His choice of the paper or the article isn't marked by any consistent theme or thematic concern. They're a mix of information. Excuse me. It's like a stream of contexts which collectively cancel each other out in terms of interpretation. The painting and the box exist together, but they're not combined. They're linked but separate. They coexist. They may or may not be exhibited together. So the paintings are days, they're dates, which are not about specific historical associations, but memorials. They're like gravestones for the time that it took Kawara to make them. And the newspapers are evidence of another type of time, scraps of history, the relentless, continuing construction of histories. So the encounter between the two different types of records, two different experiences of marking time, of giving it structure, this dichotomy, it opens up into multiple sets of oppositions. It forces a confrontation between an ultimate local time, the evidence of one day's work, and the global time of journalism. Really very dry. It forces a confrontation between the appearance of sameness and endless variation, between what's precisely defined and what's impossible to define, between the personal and impersonal. You could go on and on with Kawara's oppositions. The emphasis on continuity, the linear progression, like so much of Kawara's work, this emphasis serves to raise questions about opposing ideas. From the linearity of the linear progression of time to the relativity of time, the discontinuity of existence. There's signs of life and there's signs of death. So often, Kawara's process of making the paintings is described as meditative, as a form of meditation, that the works are traces of his experience of being in the present. They're often described to be an act of rupture within the continuity of time, activating the present. And we often hear or read that they are a challenge for the viewer to extend Kawara's ritual of meditation into our own experience of the work. Now, so far, this reading of the work sounds very soothing to me. It sounds very wise. Of course, though, we confront these paintings always as the past. The logic of the present is about its passing. It doesn't stop arriving. If there is a logic to the present, it's that at each precise moment, the moment erases itself. So we're challenged to extend Kawara's ritual of meditation in front of these days past. And what's mostly hidden but assumed or known to coexist is the social, the everything else context that's implied by the box and its newspaper. So I want to give a short preface here. Kawara's work is uniquely set up as a site for potential projection, posing as a neutral screen, both connected to the present and disconnected, all these multiple oppositions, all interpretations seem to be equally possible and equally indifferent, at least in respect to what's presented to us. And as I've thought about doing this talk, excuse me, I've kept in mind that we all make the Kawara that we need, or we get the Kawara we deserve. So, for me, this encounter with the Today paintings is indeed about the challenge of extending its ritual of meditation into the experience of the work, and it's also about the inevitable failure to do so. The idea of inhabiting the present is evoked as a challenge and then directed away by the tension of the work itself. To stage this encounter once is a melancholy challenge. To repeat it over and over and over and over, well, this is not soothing at all. This is no Walt Disney Buddhism. I went to a yoga class once, and no, I have to explain this, sorry. The instructor guy was leading us through this meditation, and he was saying all these really relaxing things about breathing. And then he says, don't think about all the things you have to do today, which of course really freaked me out. It's like the old joke, don't think of an elephant, right? So another elegant Kawara version of this feeling is very apparent with one of his most famous series, the I Am Still Alive telegrams, one of the correspondence series that he sent to different individuals over time. Again, there's so many lovely temporal entanglements. The same message repeating, I'm still alive, the urgency and the gravity of the form of the message as past, present, the good news and its potential obsolescence. Funny because it answers a question that's not asked and raises the possibility of its opposite. Some people have described feeling total panic on receiving such a telegram. And some people read it, amazingly to me, as an affirmation and describe it as hopeful. It's not a very cheerful affirmation, at least for today, I'm still alive. Actually, the series began in 1970 and then settled into the I Am Still Alive message after he sent 3 singular telegrams in 1969. The first one says, I'm not going to commit suicide, don't worry. The second one says, I'm not going to commit suicide, worry. And the third one says, I'm going to sleep, forget it. And the Today paintings began directly after he made this triptych in 1965. So immediately after these 2 singular examples, Kawara's process moved into their respective repeating systems. With one thing, 1965, Vietnam. He staged a response to one specific trauma. The Today paintings that follow don't point to one thing, they point to everything. an individual in the midst of an infinity of information. They point to everything in relation to two different temporalities or two different ways of making time real. But what kind of real is it? For me, the don't think of an elephant experience of the work that points to the impossibility of inhabiting the ever-fleeting now and repeating this in a system where subjectivity and objectivity seem to cancel each other out. This leads me to think of about a kind of traumatic real, about the definition of trauma as a missed encounter with the real, where one is always either too early or too late, but is marked by this missed encounter. So just as the present moment can never be occupied, the real can never be represented. It's always missed. It can only be repeated. Indeed, it must be repeated. The preemptive compulsion to repeat points to the real. It both screens a past encounter and points to the endless possibility of trauma, the anticipation of more coming. So the gesture of repetition that I think relates to the traumatic real is about the future as well, like on Kawara's 1 million years past, 1 million years future. It's both regression and progression. So how Foster described this idea of the traumatic real in relation to Warhol's disaster images from the 1960s. But I feel more of its stealth nature with Kawara. Of course, with Warhol, the idea of trauma is on the surface, with the fixation on the image of melancholy, the image directly translated into a painting. And with Kawara, the bad news lurks somewhere elsewhere off to the side, like the boxes. It's tempting, for me, it's tempting to think about Warhol as Kawara's evil twin. Both are absent subjects in terms of their respective mythologies, their artist personas. Kawara's work is always about his presence, and yet he's famously always absent, never photographed, never interviewed. And Warhol was always present as the blankest, most absent subject. Of course, Kawara doesn't need an evil twin. His work shows the same fixation on time as a prisoner who counts the days, doing time. Time is something you do in prison or in other institutions like schools. This is the 7th Pure Consciousness booklet. So far, it's been enacted in 9 schools. There are 9 booklets documenting the installations in Australia, Iceland, Côte d'Ivoire, China, Colombia, Sweden, France, and Brooklyn. Each booklet has a text. In the first ones, they're essays about the exhibition. In 2 cases, there's poems that are reprinted. But the last one is different, the Brooklyn one. It was installed in a Brooklyn school, and the text in this case is a series of overwhelmingly high. I didn't know that this would be big enough. So I did a thing. The text is a series of overwhelmingly high numbers. Actually, it's a reprinting of a text piece that was published by Kawara in 1969, a work that was called Code. So after this first opening number, 8,802,802, blah, 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 blah. The rest of the numbers are laid out like prose, punctuated like questions. They're a series of number questions, scrambled and indecipherable. It's still not big enough for this room, right? You can't see them. But the code piece, it's not about figuring it out or cracking the code, but about an urgent ambiguity. It points to the limitations of language systems, their inadequacies. And consciousness, according to any number of definitions, is separate from such systems. It's beyond this kind of knowledge. It's about an experience of time. Each conscious moment successively arrives, it disappears, and it has no duration, it has no number. Consciousness is a separate temporal domain, one whose chief characteristics is its apparent resistance to language. Meanwhile, we see the children in the process of learning these languages, learning the codes by which society operates. So the title refers, sorry. I don't know why, it's not. The title refers to the directness of a 5-year-old's experience, the encounter being carried out with children, because their consciousness is in a pure state, just on the threshold of being tainted by conventions inherent to their entry into culture. Now, much has been made about how this encounter lies outside the context of art. One essay says these pieces transcend the framework of art and enter the innocent world of children's lives. And the text in the Swedish booklet reads, I don't even want to read it because I do this voice when I read this text. It's a great essay, by the way, but I do that movie phone voice when I read it. In a room dedicated to play. So this is the Swedish text. In a room dedicated to play and assembly, the 12 children and their teachers will, without any previous explanation, encounter the paintings, the artist, and their own existence. So, I think that's a really funny, but whatever the children encounter, we're confronted with the booklets, and we're used to experiencing art through its documentation, especially grainy black and white photographs. It's the way that in which conceptual and performance art, the most anti-formalist, experience-oriented forms, came to rely on the medium of photography. So we encounter pure consciousness from the booklet, which activates this dialectic between presence and absence. Again, Kawara elegantly formulates a series of possible questions and oppositions. It raises questions about the oppositional division between the global and the local. From what we see in the photos, there's an enormous amount of standardization, but one can't help but examine the differences, say, between, and the one before was the differences between a school in the Côte d'Ivoire, and this is a school in Shanghai, and this is Leticia in the rural Amazon, in Avignon. The idea of the perfectibility of the child, the understanding of the child as futurity, as redemptive agent, These ideas are closely linked. The idea of the child as pure, from Rousseau to Golding, contains both fear of the unknown, fear of the unruly or uncontrollable, and a form of sentimentalization, almost a utopian vision of childhood. And although 5-year-olds are still pure in terms of some language systems and socialization, they're obviously already socialized in many ways. Their consciousness about being photographed is just one example. But in most of the photos, however, the kids seem to be unaware of the camera and the paintings. From various accounts, the work is installed before the class starts, and the kids don't seem to notice them at all. Apparently, they don't ask questions when they disappear from their class at the end of the exhibition. Again, we don't know what these kids experience. Who knows? Maybe 20 years from now, they'll be talking to their shrinks about vague memories of the Kawara paintings. But we notice them as a reformulated challenge of the Today series, raising new questions about, including questions about context, because this is where our institutionalized progression begins. The first stage in a linear process of orderly and predicted development, stages that are managed by the educational system. And current evaluation of schools emphasizes the quantification and measurement of predetermined outcomes. But what the paintings represent is the immeasurable, gestures of critical imagination, very pointed and melancholy, but which also make me enjoy not knowing and take pleasure in uncertainty. So pure consciousness was like, it was like a reboot for me in terms of my relation to the Today series. It certainly reformulates their questions and oppositions in the most discreet way. And for me, it has at least one new challenge, the idea of the sentimental. Because as Bart said, the last taboo is sentimentality. The booklets are consistent with the rest of Kawara's work, but for me, they brought me back to these paintings which had become so familiar over the years. Not that I'd come to any kind of totalizing conclusions about what they meant, but I become very comfortable with them. So the booklets brought me back to the pleasure of questions and doubt. And this is where the redemption comes in, I guess. And anyway, for me, in the spirit of this, in the spirit of rediscovery, of the astonishment of the Today paintings, I was compelled to run off to Beacon to see them again with 1-year-old Thomas Ladaga. So, and we know in addition to Thomas's pure consciousness, the air of Kawara's gallery at Beacon is ionized. So it's purifying the atmosphere there, so it's like a double pure consciousness. What I really hoped for actually is that people would respond or talk about what they thought of the Pure Consciousness project. So I'm going to stop here with Thomas, and hopefully people, oh, there we, hopefully people, I think he felt the ionizers, actually. And hopefully there's questions, or not questions, comments.
I have a question.
People could maybe explain these things to me.
Who took the photographs?
It's a different photographer each time. In some cases, I'm pretty sure it was the teacher, but the France ones are remarkably more self-conscious as photographs. But who knows? I don't know. I should have a list of the photographers to acknowledge them. In each of the booklets at the last page, there's the credits. So yeah, they're accredited. Maybe Lynn knows. There.
But I have a question, and that's about history overtaking the viewer in a sense, and I ask it in relation to your own work. That you exhibited a series of works of people falling from the building, from buildings, and that show, during the span of that show, the 9/11 events occurred. And I'm wondering, you've obviously thought a great deal about how history and events in history calls us to reread representations. And I've always wondered about these things. When we look at dates, some of these dates strike each of us as significant in ways that on Kawara obviously allows for, but you can never know. And the history that's in the newspaper clippings is a history in the world in some sense. It's a history that's given in print. How do you see history overtake, or do you see history overtaking the today paintings? And is that part of the experiencing of them in the present?
Well, it's funny because its relationship to its own history is what is being kind of reformulated with pure consciousness. So, and there's still question marks. The most remarkable, I'm trying to understand exactly what your question was in relation to my own work, but how obviously the context shifted everything in 9/11. And then, you know, it was a really hysterical time, and people kept going, well, what is it? Nicole can tell you. People kept saying, well, what do they mean now? What do they mean now? As if they had some stable meaning before. And I think that with that work, I was trying to embrace an ambiguity. And was kind of, you know, learned a lot about the quagmire of unintended topicality. But in terms of Kawara, I guess I'm trying to describe my experience, because I've loved him and he had this sort of pointed effect, you know, when I was first looking at him through years and years and years, and then I was trying to describe this type of comfortability I'd become. And as an artist, I'm kind of, I've often wondered what, you know, we all wonder what Kawara's thinking, right? But I've often wondered how he thinks about this, like whether he did this gesture of pure consciousness to sort of reboot or refresh our looking at these things. Is that an answer to your question, or it's rambling?
Well, I guess I'd say he's found ways of recontextualizing them a number of times, I guess from the 90s onwards, and maybe later, of which this seems to me one amongst a number of different ways to work with them. There was an exhibition where he made a series that were all chosen from cities outside the city he lived in, New York. They were all port cities, I think. And then there was another one where he chose only paintings made in one language, in one city. And then he chose consecutive years, and they were installed with paintings from the collection in the place he was exhibiting that were made in those years. And so there have been many different ways of reactivating these paintings, you might say, under different circumstances, of which the kindergarten school series is one. And he's moved the schools from continent to continent, and there are different things. The paintings are consecutive days or consecutive years. So I suppose I've been interested in watching the way that the series that began under circumstances that had a very intuitive basis in that he only painted them on the days he felt like painting them. And as you say, they have to be painted within 24 hours or they were destroyed. So they have, when you look at the calendar of the dates, and there's a calendar in Beacon where he's marked the dates, painted them at least for the first 30 years. It's a very, there's no system to it. It's entirely intuitive, but they have the appearance of part of being highly objective. And yet, as you say, they're hand-painted, and the typefaces are invented, they're not standardized. He doesn't understand this and so on. But this recontextualizing them through the school project seems to me part of a larger ongoing project. And so I was very interested in the way you were talking about schooling as an entry into culture. One of the entry points into acculturation, and how that brings to the writing history.
Yeah. Well, it's actually, I didn't think it would be very interesting, so I didn't include it. But I did a lot of research on the debate that's going on right now in Britain, which they're starting at the kindergarten level, and they're starting these programs that are about this idea of the child as perfectible thing, and they're about creating a non-criminal child. They're preventative in terms of that. So, I mean, that's just one of the way we sort of think about these stages, which of course goes against all the other things that are happening in the paintings. And for me, like, it's true, he's contextualized the Today paintings so often in different things, and so have curators, obviously, with different artworks, with photography, with different ideas of time. And I guess it's just subjective, but it was a big challenge, like the sentimental, photographing children, the presentation of that in relationship to these extremely, sort of morbid things. It felt a little different for me from the other ones, but I don't know. It's totally consistent with his work. But it felt like a kind of gasp of breath, or something had opened up in a really challenging way. Yeah.
I'm really curious about this contextualizing aspect that you're talking about. And I'm wondering, the difference that you're feeling in the pure consciousness ones is that, in fact, he's actually recontextualizing the school. It's not really recontextualizing as much as the dessert changes within different contexts.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. No, I mean, I think that sounds very wise. Sorry?
Well, the kids become kind of usurped by the project on a certain level.
Mm-hmm.
And it's particularly interesting that he's using the content of school children.
Yeah.
For the relationship with the
No, that would be creepy. No, I read these sort of conditions, and they said, no, you're not allowed. Well, as if the photographs don't have a kind of quality of that, but no.
So there are two sets of viewers of the work, right? Like the children in the classroom, presumably, and then we who do
Yeah,
the project only through the book.
right.
And do you know like how the booklets circulate or disseminate, or
I think they do like catalogs. They function like catalogs, and they're available like catalogs, perhaps not as available as some. But they're very elegant in scale, 6 by 8. They're all the same format.
Could you talk a little bit about what you keep calling the morbidity of this work?
The morbidity?
Yeah, like what's morbid about?
Well, I guess I tried to sort of do that, to talk about the stopping place in terms of the challenge. In other words, I feel like they're suggesting, or there's a suggestion, and I'm not sure whether this is coming from the work itself or from the way it's been contextualized, so like a heavy, sort of overwhelming tone of contextualization, but there's a suggestion that you're supposed to enter Kawara's sort of meditative Buddhist moment. And but in the terms of the work set it up, as I tried to explain really inarticulately, so that you can't do it. That's what I feel, anyway. And even though his work seems like this sort of neutral screen, and for every time you come to some conclusion on Kawara, the next moment you realize it's a false sort of conclusion because its opposite is equally true. And so there's this thing going on with him. I feel for me it's an extremely morbid experience.
Yeah, because I think I have a somewhat different take. Maybe it's
What's your take?
maybe it's closer to the Buddhist take, but being a totally amateur at the whole.
Well, I'm no Buddhist, but I don't think I'm anti-Buddhist.
No, I think that my point is that by painting the date, that's an activity that marks time's passage in a way that I think is Buddhist in the enlightened sense of letting it go, but that by lining the boxes with the newspaper article, that functions in two ways. It's both a mnemonic device for remembering where he was, what was happening in the world on that day. It's also a way of holding on to the past. So like for me, the paintings kind of are an activity that marks the passage of time and impermanence, while the newspapers hold on to it. So I think that goes to your opposites.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really see them as morbid.
See, even as you were talking, I was thinking that's a really morbid idea. But that's just...
The gravestone, the image in that, I'm talking about this gravestone, is very evocative and gets at the morbidity, which I also agree with. I mean, I see in that too, but that way of being kind of memorials of, I mean, the sheer fact of a moment in time that's not happening yet. And, I mean, but there's more of that kind of quantum aspect that we're trying to draw out and look to the traumatic real more.
But I mean,
the thing that really makes sense to me. Seeing them that way makes sense to me. It's never how I've ever seen them.
Yeah, I think that was very,
But that's very compelling.
But to counter this notion of the sort of Buddhist tradition and the capturing of the moment, the true capturing of temporality, fleeting as it may be, it stands in complete contrast to what we would consider as a Buddhist painting. Normally, if you come, especially from the Japanese tradition, there would be these uber expressionistic maneuvers that are supposed to express complete absence of the person rising expression. And what struck me as incredible in these paintings every time I look at them is the fact that they are handmade. Because they look so machine said so basically, and to hear that experts need microscopes in order to see flawed lines there strikes me as complete counter to this notion of being the moment. Right?
But I don't think that being in the moment, I think that the only way that I can think of being in the moment in the Buddhist sense is of being aware of impermanence, which is the opposite of that holding on to the instant of consciousness, the pure consciousness.
And yet you end up marking the date.
Absolutely. Yeah, but in making the painting and spending your day doing nothing but making a painting, that becomes like a form of meditation.
Well, that's a challenge.
It's an activity that I can't enter into, but I can certainly get off on his unbelievable persistence.
well, yeah, I mean, I think the perspective, there's different perspectives about this succession that happens and this constant flow. And I think that, but I respect Buddhism too much to not see it as a really difficult thing to do. And for me, the Kawara pieces they aren't neutral in terms of that difficult thing to do. They're actually a bait and switch and a really difficult, like, sort of I guess that might be too. See, every time I think I'm overstating the case, but like I said, I think it's probably just my projection, and I don't see them as benign objects at all. And when I first saw the photographs of pure consciousness, there's so many differences, but it reminded me of like a 2001 Kubrick thing where the monkeys aren't aware of the monolith, and even in that movie, it wasn't about a simple presence. It was about progress and about change happening and this sort of complex multiplicity of things. But anyway, I think I kind of am beginning to understand what you're trying to say.
David, I have a question for you.
I want to just ask Nancy a question.
Okay, sure.
Where does Barthes say that sentimentality is the last taboo?
In the intro to Lover's Discourse.
What was your question?
Now, man. I want to know, you were talking about this notion of holding on to something, right? What do you consider, if there is a difference, holding on to versus referencing something? Because I've always taken it as referencing that date and time. In the newspaper, it was almost like a statement of fact. I mean, it's multi-layered, of course, but I don't necessarily see it as holding on to something more than referencing something. Do you consider there a difference, or do you think it's the same?
But you know, I'll ignore the fact that I hate the use of the word referencing as a pronoun since we're not in school. But but I think that it refers to a moment and to something that happened in that moment. It's a concrete thing.
The newspaper isn't a moment, though. It's a reference of the day past.
Yeah, it refers very concretely to things that happened and were reported on during that time. And in that sense, I do regard it as a way of holding on to something that otherwise would be forgotten in the making of a painting that shows nothing but the date.
Okay, yeah.
According to the conventions of where he was when he made that painting.
Yeah.
And so what's the function of the box? Is it just to, is it only lined in the newspaper, or is it used to transport?
I think, well, each box is handmade for the particular painting, and they're stored in them. And sometimes they're exhibited, and sometimes not. I heard there's one box for a painting. Is that not so, Lynn?
Well, that's not so, actually.
Oh.
Some of the paintings don't have boxes.
Yeah, I think so.
I heard he stopped putting the newspapers, but I couldn't find any sort of reference to that.
That's not true. I thought I learned it from you.
I saw them show in boxes as the very, very big ones.
Yes, they are.
There's like 69 I'm not sure that they do it, but in principle, they would take it as a box.
Yeah, and it's there to contain the thing.
And to protect it, and for it to travel, and arrive basically.
But so the box, when the painting is exhibited, the box could be in storage.
Could be.
It could be, or sometimes the box is
Yeah.
with things. So it's interesting because the box functions as a container, but when the painting is not in the box is empty. And there's just the lining of the newspaper, and I'm thinking of one of the other things in Buddhism, not so much impermanence, but emptiness. Emptiness. And so that I'm thinking of emptiness as a box in the relationship of a painting stored in a box when it's not stored.
Oh, that's interesting. It's interesting.
Well, idea at Beacon, the boxes are not in the installation. And when I did a gallery talk in that gallery about a year ago, I requested and happily was given permission to bring a couple of the boxes into the gallery just to show the people who attended the talk. Because I think that they're just so astonishing to me to actually see in relation to the things. But is that his stipulation?
When we did Sean 22nd Street in 1991, we changed the paints every month, and they'd be down in January 1966 and ended up right before the show opened. And with each month, the display was different, and some months we had boxes and some we didn't, and it was entirely his determination.
But they're always there. Right. I mean, for me, I'm just talking about the abstract. For me, they're always there. And what the stopping point is always there, whether it's shown together or not.
Well, that speaks a lot about viewership, especially with...
No, yeah.
Yeah, and with the students, I mean, with the kids, like, you know, he said maybe they don't notice it, maybe they do, maybe they talk
Right.
about it to their shrink 30 years later. But in the gallery, it functions in the same way, because when I first encountered his work, I mean, I never saw the boxes. And I just saw these paintings, and at first I was puzzled. And then, of course, I researched and realized what it was. And still, to this day, I've not seen the boxes displayed with the paintings. And of course, I've seen mainly the large paintings, and mainly in places where they own the work. And so I'm wondering about, you know, these large institutions like these museums that own the actual paintings, and even in their permanent collections, they never display the boxes, which is such an integral part to the concept.
You're wondering why the predominant mode of display for the today paintings is without the boxes?
Correct.
I don't know.
If the boxes are so important to the concept of the work, then why is the predominant mode to show them without the boxes?
I don't know. I think,
I mean, did you say that he determines it always?
Well,
Just for your benefit?
in the cases where we made this ongoing presentation, he decided that on which ones he had boxes and which ones he wouldn't, and Bacon he decided he didn't want boxes. If you're a museum or in a collection, it's optional.
It's,
You
yeah,
can leave the boxes, you can leave them out, you can sometimes have the boxes.
right.
So when you say they're absolutely integral to the project, it's
Not
that
necessarily.
you're reading into it, they're physically part of the project. Conceptually, with all their place, I think what Nancy was saying is very open. There are many ways of actually reading that as it shifts from context to context.
Yeah,
It's the ability, they're very labile as everything.
yeah.
I want to ask you about pathos and mobility.
yes?
Is when you talk about morbidity in your work, is pathos part of that? Is pathos different from that? Could you just talk a little about how you see those terms as interchangeable or different?
Did I use the term pathos? I don't think it is. Pathos for me, and this is probably not accurate, but it's more operatic or something. And morbidity is more flexible as a term, or has a broader kind of thing. When I was talking about the traumatic real, I don't think about that as in terms of pathos, but maybe I need to look back in my dictionary and figure that out. Why? What do you think?
Well, I'm not thinking in terms of definitions so much, but I see pathos in a passage of time, if you talk about ephemerality of the moment, and moments that time compelled and experiential moments. I'm having a hard time with morbidity.
Really? Oh. Even, I mean, I guess that I don't, I'm still alive. You don't find that morbid?
It's all about how do you keep your existence from going away. I mean, he's like fighting to prove his existence somehow, day after day, by attaching himself to the cultural meaning of the date.
Like a survival.
Yeah, it's like if he doesn't
Yeah.
do this, then he'll disappear. For me, that's the morbidity of it.
Just another question. Is he make the box or?
Yeah, he makes the box. Yeah, I mean, I think this idea of it as a time capsule, or a survivalist thing, and the morbidity, I guess, that's probably a projection. But I guess there's when you see life and death in this equal kind of balance thing, and the glass is half full, half empty kind of thing. I'm always on the half empty one. It's true. But I don't, I think Kawara is so elegant in his gesture that it it feels like tenderness. And I would make the same point about his irony, which is so, irony is not, I think it's a misused term, and we're supposedly post-ironic now or whatever, but it's a very precious, precious, critical thing. And Kawara reminds me of how it can be used with tenderness and criticality. And I would say his morbidity is tender too.
So, you know how you talked about how it's like the classroom's like an encounter for these kids learning language, and then this is a day that means something for some people, but those kids, they don't, they're still okay about it or something. Is that like the I or personal pronouns? You know how it's like you want to say something really personal and say you say I love you, but then somebody else is going to say that too, and they all say the same thing. Is that the same thing, like personal pronouns never being, like the I never being something personal, ultimately?
Are you saying that kids don't know how to distinguish between I and we and all of that?
No. You know how when you want to address yourself or you want to address your person. I guess I think it is in Roland Barthes too, like how I is never as personal as you would like it to be. I think it's either in Ferdinand Saussure or Roland Barthes.
And that
I'm just wondering if that's because I feel like everybody's having a dilemma with, is it the is it the painting, or is it the box, is it the date, like how you feel about the date, or is it the personal bit? I mean, you also did the whole sort of the dialectic of those paintings or whatever, and maybe that's what's really sad is language is this collective thing, and in order for it to work collectively, it can never be as like your own, you know what I mean? Like in personal context is always, and I don't know, because I always feel like the context thing, you want to talk about it and say, oh well, the exploitation is always the same, in the materialist way, in like history, but then you're like, well, these kids actually died, or like this person that died had a family or whatever, you know what I mean, like natural catastrophes or whatever. I don't know, maybe it's
I lost you around the natural catastrophe thing, but I was with you before.
Okay. But I don't know, maybe that's interesting. I just thought the part where you sort of use the painting as an interface for cultural conventions, I thought that was really interesting. And, language.
Yeah, it made me research like this stage of kindergarten, which was, not very interesting, so I didn't put it in. But and also the history of experiments, like not on kids, but experimental photographic documentation of looking at that, and there's so many interesting sort of disorientation that kids at that age have about time and about like pronouns, like you say.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about, you were talking about repeated trauma in your work, and I was actually thinking about Hal Foster and his idea of uncanny, and putting these things that in a way are repeated trauma in a kindergarten classroom is kind of,
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I thought.
I get that. I'm a little morbid, and I kind of get that morbidity as well. So.
I mean, it's completely benign, right? But there is that, yeah.
There's the meditative side, but then I think there also is that repeated trauma, and I think there's something kind of sickly funny about putting them in a kindergarten classroom.
I think so too. I think so too. But I'm also, really open to understanding that you can. There's also something very sweet about it too, I think.
What's sweet about it?
Well, who can what are you gonna say? You're like looking at a 5-year-old kid. It's sweet, I think. No, it's like the debate about the purity of children or the innate goodness of children. Obviously, they're not. Socrates called them tyrants, but obviously they're not tyrants nor innately good either. And that's part of the interesting sort of way you figure it out.
It's the ambiguity of the child trying to want to couple it into the world, but I don't see that as sweet. Not even looking at them in reference to the thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I know what you mean.
We can leave it at that.
I think I do.
Okay.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.